There we
Mr.
go.
Collin Foote. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm good, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing phenomenal. So, basically, a little bit of background about how we first connected. We were just connecting on Instagram because I'm obviously into entrepreneurship and selling things online and e-commerce. And I came across one of your stories and I'm like, oh, hey, this guy's doing Amazon. So I'm like, hey, let's connect and see like how we can collaborate somehow or just share knowledge, right? So, uh, Colin, how did you first get into entrepreneurship and like what's a little bit of background about how you got started?
Yeah, so I think I've always been somewhat of an entrepreneur. Probably not to the scale that some people were, but I remember when I was little, I was the kid when it snowed. I would go door to door trying to shovel people's driveways. So that's just always been something in me. Like, how can I make a dime? How can I, you know, use a current circumstance to make a little bit of money? But I graduated school in 2018, got a 9 to 5 selling IT conferences, and that's just not my wheelhouse. I was really good at it. I was at 125% of my quota within 6 months. I was the number one salesman in North and South America in 6 months, and I was just like, I can't talk to IT people all day. I'm going to go crazy. I was just basically a phone boy. All I did, strapped on my headset and talked for 9 hours a day. And I'm like, I can do something much bigger than this. Not arrogantly, but just like what I'm doing right now is constricting my mindset. So I saw an ad for this thing called Amazon FBA, and I'm like, what is this? Are they just trying to like scam me in a way, like buy my course and kind of just send me on my way? But
Yeah,
um,
there's a
I,
lot of that online, right?
yeah, exactly. It's someone who's like, oh, I did 6 figures. Well, over a course of 10 years, like that's not amazing, but okay. But so I saw it. I'm like, I'm not going to buy your course. I'm going to figure this out. And just started looking on YouTube. I found this guy on Instagram, and I just reached out to him, and he's verified, has like 100,000 followers, but he would respond to me and was willing to help just because he's like, I figured this out. I want to help other young guys do this too. So I just quit my job and I said, I'm going to do this. And, off of a couple $100s of an investment, we turned it into $5,000, then $10,000. And now we just recently had our first $1,000 day. So, it's been able to grow steadily. And obviously there's been hiccups along the way with
Right.
virus and
Yeah.
cease and desists and just trying to learn how to navigate business.
All of
But
the unknown for sure. So
yeah.
when you were first hopping in, I want to ask about that moment where you said, I'm going to quit my job and go at this full time. How hard of a decision was that? And like, what was your kind of situation in the background of like, do you have, like a backup house to like crash
Yeah.
in or like, because I know a lot of people are like, hey, I'm 24, 25, I want to start a business but I can barely afford rent or something like that. So like,
Yeah.
what was that decision like and what were your circumstances?
Yeah. Obviously, you need to be smart in that decision. In my circumstance, I was still living at my parents' house. So I had that as like a fallback where I didn't have rent. But I also had saved a lot of money since I was little. I had been working since I was about 10 years old. So I had a little bit of a like nest egg or whatever you want to call it where I could.
I like to say throughout time you're building a lifeboat, right? In case the Titanic
Exactly.
sinks, you have your own lifeboat. That's what like being smart with your savings is like. Yeah. Cool.
Exactly. Especially for when the economy shuts down and you can't make money. How are you supposed to live? So it's always smart to have a little bit of cash just sitting ready to be used. But, I wasn't taking a paycheck for probably 6 months or so, which was difficult, even, just living expenses. And we just moved into an apartment. So like we're still dealing with that because right now I want to leverage all this money that I'm making and put it back into the business. So like each $1 that you make, you can make that $6 to $10 more in a couple of months. So I'm trying to leverage as much of this cash in the business to make it 10x of what it is right now. So
Yeah.
to answer your question, it's difficult at times, but you just need to learn how to be smart with your money and just trust your gut. If you think you're going to be good at this, dive all in, learn about it, become an expert, and do it. you can't half do it, right? It's something you need
Correct.
to spend time and learn about it, become an expert, and really conquer whatever market you're going into.
Yeah, I'm sure you kind of had a similar experience where you were kind of learning about it and your interest kind of persisted over time. And once you had enough information, you're like, all right, maybe I'll like dilly daddle a little bit into
Yeah.
this. But at a certain point, like you're right, you have to just kind of commit to it full time. And like uh, currently, like I was, I'm working a full time job essentially and doing small stores on the side, a few of which that actually took off. But then you never know when road bumps are going to come into
Yeah.
play and your whole thing's going to crumble. That's the beauty of entrepreneurship. But I
Yep.
think that uh, like basically I had to dedicate all of my free time to the store and to running this business if I wanted anything to go any further. Right. So I think that's like
Right.
a super hard decision for a lot of people that are just like questioning whether they can do it. But I guess the general consensus is that you have, if you think you can do it and you're smart with the kind of way you enter it and you have savings, like you just kind of have to fully commit. Right.
Yeah, yeah. I remember I was sitting at my desk, like kind of what you said. I was like dabbling into it. I was learning about it, but then also I was like at my desk job on the phone, and I was trying to text and negotiate with suppliers in China at the same time, which is super difficult trying to do two jobs at the same time. So, like you said, you either need to pour all your free time into it, so then your social life decreases, you can't exercise as much, whatever, or just dive all in. Like those are your two options with entrepreneurship. And a lot of young guys like us are kind of stuck in that in between where it's like all of your free time's going towards building these businesses, or you have to take that jump and not have a salary to back you up while you're trying to build something. So those are like
Exactly.
really the two options that you have.
Right. So at what point did you realize that it was actually legitimate, like that internet money was real? Like, was there a single point or did it just kind of
Yeah. Yeah, so I think the first time I realized, like, dang, like this is pretty sweet. I I was driving to Miami. We live in Southwest Florida, so it's like a 2-hour drive, and I was driving to Miami for a Post Malone concert.
solid?
As we were driving, we got like 10 sales while we were driving, and I'm like, I'm not working right now, and I'm making money. That's so cool. And then I would say the second time that hit was really like Black Friday, Cyber Monday, Q4, just like that explosion that you see where you're like, I'm really not putting as much time into this as much money I'm making. And that's sweet.
Right. It's I describe it as, the cliche like making money while you sleep, but it's building an asset that can basically live on its own, which is the coolest part
Yep.
of it. I've
Yep.
had plenty of those mornings where I'll roll over like, blurry eyed and check my phone notifications and there's like 10 Shopify notifications, or I was like, oh, I literally just made money in my sleep. It's like
Yeah.
it's weird to say because it sounds super scammy, but it's legit. Like if you build
Yeah.
this thing, it will work.
Yeah. Well, Warren Buffett, Warren Buffett, Warren Buffett says,
Warren
if you
Buffett.
don't learn, Warren Buffett,
Warren Buffett. Yeah.
no, Warren Buffett says, if you don't learn how to make money when you're sleeping, you'll work until the day you die. And that's something that really changed my mindset with this e-commerce space, is that it's an asset. It's not a job. You're building assets that make money for you while you're not paying attention to them, really. And that's a
Exactly.
super cool thing about this online money that we can make.
Yeah, it's a lot of upfront work, and obviously it's not easy to make it successful, but once you have a system in place and you've put forth all of this energy to like build this asset, that's exactly what it becomes, is just this automated asset essentially.
Right.
So real quick, uh, a couple successes early on and a couple failures early on. Well, maybe we'll start with failures. What were your biggest like hiccups in regards to starting your Amazon FBA business?
Yeah, I would say not understanding the terms of service 100%. Just because even if you're like somewhat close to breaking them, other sellers can hit you with a cease and desist and shut down your listings. That's what we got hit with, even though it was wrongful. but it was so close to being on the line where it was like, okay, Amazon's got to choose between two people, and they're going to choose with someone who's probably been selling longer. So that was something I wish we would have like just sat down and read and learned, like actually, what are we doing that could break the rules? A second one would be kind of like killing myself with the amount of hours I was working, because with Amazon, you have to negotiate with suppliers in China just at the start because it's cheaper, right? You can't afford a U.S. supplier at the beginning unless you find something super sweet for a sweet deal. But I was negotiating with China until 2 or 3 in the morning at times, and then I would wake up and want to get to work at like 7 o'clock. So I was getting like 3 hours of sleep a night, 4 hours of sleep a night, and having to deal with someone who doesn't understand English, and like their cultures are clashing. So like that's also another thing I had to learn is like, how do I talk to someone in a different culture that doesn't understand our culture? I don't understand theirs. So I had to read up on, what makes these Chinese sellers tick a little bit. Like, how can I negotiate the price down? How can I
Right.
be respectful to them, even if it's not something I would necessarily do in the US, but something I would say to them or, offer them
Right.
in
Yeah.
a sense.
Definitely. I think number one thing about working with Chinese suppliers is learning how to communicate across those cultural barriers. And like, you have to do it almost in a forced way because you obviously have a goal, but you want to be respectful at the same time but also
Right.
try to make the most money. So I think that's a super valuable skill, but
Yeah.
that was probably one of the hardest things to do because like you're right, China's business hours in the USA are probably 5 p.m. on USA time, right? So it's like,
Well, yeah, I'm on the East Coast, so they probably don't start till 9 o'clock at night at times.
right,
Sometimes even later than that. So it's all
exactly.
wacky.
So if you really want it, I guess the only solution is to lose a few hours of sleep.
Yeah, I mean, you have to do it at the beginning, or else you won't get things done, and you'll be communicating every other day with them. And the best time to get them is while they're at their computer, actually chatting with you. So,
Yeah, love
um,
that. What about
yeah.
what about successes? Besides obviously like making some money like when you first started, like that's a huge mental shift. You're like, oh, like I'm actually making money. What were your like top 2 or 3 successes while starting out that kind of propelled you forward?
So I would say for the first product we started with, I was like, this is a piece of junk. I don't know why we're selling it. And sometimes I still feel like that, but it makes money, so I'm okay with it. Um, but I would say when we got Amazon's Choice, that banner that you see, I started selling on Amazon. I'm like, oh, that's Amazon selling that product. So they give that Amazon's Choice banner. But it's actually just sellers like you and me and like normal people. But it's based off of a few different indicators, like how many people are buying it a day, are your reviews good, what's your conversion rate on the product, and what's your ranking. So that was something that really kind of like hit me. I'm like, dang, like I did something right here, and how do I replicate that? Because once we got Amazon's Choice on that product, we saw like a 20 to 30% increase in sales. And in
Wow, that's
Q4,
huge. Yeah.
that's massive, right? So that was probably our biggest success of how quickly we were able to achieve that, even though I didn't really know what I was doing necessarily, and now that I know that, I can start to replicate it with other products.
Right.
And then the second success, it doesn't sound like a success, but it is, because it was like the first time in business where I'm like, okay, like we might lose everything that I just spent 4 or 5 months building. Is when that cease and desist hit us, I was like, okay, I'll never be able to sell on Amazon again. I don't know what to do. But I had to spend hours reading of how do I navigate this. I had to learn how to contact the lawyer that reached out to us. What do I say to them? How do I make sure that this claim gets removed from our account? And I was able to do that in a matter of like 48 hours after I initially emailed them
That's
that
boss
lawyer.
mode.
Uh, yeah,
Then
I was
48
like,
hours
all right,
later. Yeah.
yeah. I'm like, I'm
Well,
23. I'm talking to a lawyer. He's like one of the best e-commerce lawyers on the West Coast. Why is he going to listen to me? But for some
yeah.
reason, he was super nice and
Yeah.
actually removed the
That's a
claim.
That's one thing that e-commerce forces you to do, because you never know what's going to come your way, and you realize that you are legitimate. You're a legitimate business entity, and at certain points like that, you're forced to kind of step up. Being an entrepreneur at such a young age, it kind of forces you to step up your game.
Mhm.
And I think that the barrier to entry is really low now, in a sense of, you're a 23-year-old, I'm a 24-year-old, and we're doing all this crazy stuff that you never would have thought would be possible at a certain age, right? Like communicating internationally with suppliers, doing $1,000 a day, $5,000 a day, $10,000 a day. And you're like, oh, I'm just some guy who figured out how to connect the dots online.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, it's honestly crazy. Like when you think of, what you add basically to the supply chain, it's almost minimal once you figure it out, right? Like you said, you have to put in a lot of time to create these assets. But after you learn how to communicate with suppliers and connect those dots and, get eyes to your listing or your website, it's really that simple, right? At the end of the day, you're not adding that much to the supply chain other than getting people to purchase the product. But if
Right.
you can figure that out, you can make a lot of money.
Yeah. That's an awesome point, because the process that's hard is figuring that out. But once you kind of get it and like the work that goes into it, you're like, oh, there's literally no limits.
Hmm.
It's
You can
crazy.
just replicate it over and over again.
Exactly. So wrapping things up, I know we've been talking a little bit. Uh, do you have any advice for people that are looking to start out with online sales, or just being an entrepreneur in general?
Yeah, I mean, I'm more of an extremist, so I would encourage anyone to just jump in and do it. I'm not saying quit your job, but I'm saying, you know, sacrifice things right now so you don't have to sacrifice things later. So, being an entrepreneur, you can make a lot of money pretty quickly. So you don't have to be working when you're 50 or 60 and relying on your social security checks to come in. So take your time now and learn actually how business works. It might not work out now, but it might work out in 5 years. Learn how to do it, learn how to be an entrepreneur, learn how business works, and try something out, because that's the only way you're ever going to make a side hustle income, or even your sole income.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say. Just do it. Educate yourself and become an expert and do it.
Huge advocate of that. I think that we have to realize that right now, if you're in your early 20s, I guess through 30s, I think that now is the time to do it because of your situation. You have the time and energy. You have the ability to fail and get back up. You're not starting a business when you're 50 or 60. Not saying there is an age limit, but you have less obligations now, and now's the time to hustle and learn, so that even, let's say, if you're unsuccessful for the next 10 years, you're still 30, right? Like there's
Right.
there's not a time limit on it, but I think the quicker you get into it and the quicker you try to figure things out and what works for you, that's what's really going to set you apart from the rest of the crowd, right?
Right. Yeah. And like most of us are going to be getting checks from the government here in a couple weeks or whatnot, those $1,200. Like take that money and try to create it, or double it or triple it, because that's free money. Go do something with it, because that's probably all you need to honestly just start to try this e-commerce thing. It's free money. Why not try to
Yep.
do it?
Yeah, I started with about $1,000, and uh, I think that, like, there's also this deception of, oh, I'm going to drop $1,200 or whatever, and it's going to be gone. Not essentially. Like, you're still you're investing it into a business entity, right? Whether that's the ad data, right? For when I started out, it was like, oh, I spent $1,000 on ads, but I made 600 of that back. I was like down maybe $400 for spending $1,000 worth of data on consumers, right? So it was like,
Mhm.
it's not going to waste if you stick with it long term.
Right.
Love that. Awesome. Collin, thank you for joining today. I appreciate your time and all of your insightful information. I hope you have a great rest of your quarantine.
Awesome, man. Thanks. You too.